And I knew that I wanted to go back and forth between my personal and my professional life, because I knew that would be a good way to tell the story, right? And a lot of times when you read a cop book, you don't get that involved in the cop's personal life.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch, so let's get into this. There's no way anybody who's read your book would ever thought that you would have gotten into law enforcement.
Sometimes I still can't believe it myself. It was definitely not a path that I saw myself being on or going on while I was growing up, but at some point in my life, as a teenager, I knew that I had to do something different than what I was doing, because I knew where I would eventually end up if I continued on that path. And, I started hanging out with the wrong crowd. I guess you could say initially I started hanging out with them to get away from turmoil that was going on in my house. Had a lot of domestic issues in my house. My father drank a lot, and my mother argued frequently, and I just found myself wanting an escape. So I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and it took me in the streets, and I stopped going to school, which, before I started hanging out in the streets, I was pretty good in school. I loved it. Was kind of smart, but once I started with the wrong crowd, I just stopped going to school. Obviously my grades suffered as a result. I went to juvenile hall, went to jail a couple of times, and eventually, I just dropped out of school. And in order to not end up in jail or dead like some of my friends, I decided to get away, and I joined the Marine Corps.
To say you were smart is not even kind of an understatement. You went into high school at 12 years old.
Yes.
Were you in any type of advanced programs leading up to that?
No. What happened was, while I was in middle school, one of my teachers felt that I had a higher aptitude than the children that I was in class with, and they went to the principal and they suggested that I be put up a grade so that I would be among kids that were more along my advanced stage of learning. And that's why I was able to go to high school at such a young age.
Your book was a very good read, and I read it myself, and I'm going to reference it at certain times, but I really want people to go read the book on their own. So I don't want to go deep into a lot of the stories. Okay. You mentioned early on, though, that you were really into art and comic books.
Yes. Was the comic books your entry into reading, or were you already a voracious reader at that point in time? You know what? I was, I loved reading. My mother often told the stories of when I was 2 and 3 years old. I would get a newspaper and spread it out on the floor and lay in front of it with my chin in my hands and, pretend that I was reading. So it started very early on. And once I, gained an aptitude to understand what I was looking at, I started reading all kinds of books. Frederick Douglass was one of my favorites because I was named after him. So I wanted to know about the man that I was named after. And then I started reading comic books. I started reading comic books when I was about six or 7 years old, and I started drawing what I was seeing in the comic books, and realized that I had a very high aptitude for art as well. And I know comic books not as much as it used to be kind of like a joke. Oh, he's a comic book reading kid, but actually comic books help the vocabulary if you're a child at a young age, because a lot of the stories in comic books aren't for children. So they increase or enhance your vocabulary, because a lot of the words that are in those comic books, like I said, they're adult words. And I would often read the comic books, come across a word I was unfamiliar with. And, this is before Apple and Google. I'd go get a dictionary and I'd look up the word, and I would learn the word. And once I learned a word, I never forgot it. So yeah, comic books definitely enhanced my reading ability and my comprehension for the written word.
Do you still do art today?
Yes.
Are
Yes, I
you drawing, painting? What piques your interest?
I like to draw. Also use pastel on occasion. My son, Desmond, is a phenomenal artist, and he started drawing when he was probably 4 years old. Just beautiful renderings of things that he would see, and I would look at some of the things that he drew, and I was like, God, he's much better than I was. When I was his age. I mean, he's so far advanced. And, I bought him everything that he needed. Whenever he wanted something, to draw, no matter what medium, I would buy it for him and let him experiment with it. And then one day he just kind of lost interest in it. He'll still dabble in it from time to time, but now he's into video games and TikTok videos, and he makes these videos on his own in the backyard, and he posts them, and he's brilliant at that too. So I don't want to stagnate his growth and whatever he wants to do, even though I would prefer that he become an artist because that was my passion. But if he wants to venture out into other things, like, computers and video games, God forbid I should stop him. He might end up being a programmer or writing code. So I just let him do whatever he's comfortable with. I'm basically letting him find his own way as far as this art.
When you think about it as a parent, because you and I are close in age, when we were kids, if we would have told our parents, I want to be a comic book illustrator, they'd have laughed you out. Anybody you came in contact with would have laughed you out of it. Then fast forward to today, what comics have become.
Yes.
It's that same thing.
That's why you cannot, talk down to your child when they want to do something, even if it's something that you don't particularly agree with. Like I said, in the 60s, and comic books were thought of as for nerds, and, like you said, they would laugh at you if you wanted to draw comics. But fast forward to now, like you said, and look how much money it is in it. Every big movie now, it's based on comic books. And like I said, they're well written, so you can actually create these outstanding, movies that everyone loves. So what you and I think may be for nerds, let your child do what they want to do, because you never know what it can end up. So that's why I let my son Desmond, I give him plenty of rope for creativity and what he wants to do.
You also talked about in your book that your father played music. Did music ever become a part of your life?
No, I never had any type of aptitude for musical instruments. I love music, all kinds of music. My music taste is kind of eclectic because I go from, rock to Christianity, gospel. I listen to everything, right? So I have a good ear for music, and it was probably because I used to watch my father play the guitar when I was growing up, because he played it often, and he was very, very good. He was a good singer, but I just never had any kind of skill for music.
You've talked about writing as being an interest of yours for many years, and you didn't start writing the book simply when you ended your law enforcement career, and we're going to get into that. But when you were a young child, was your artistic passions encouraged or were they discouraged?
I want to say my parents were kind of ambivalent towards my talent, because, I like drawing Superman and Spider-Man and, Batman and things like that, which if you're skilled, you can draw some very good comic book characters. But because of the stigma attached to comic book characters, it wasn't really encouraged by my parents to pursue that. So I started drawing other things. I got into, once I painted a mural on a store down the street from my house. The owner of the store, he hired me and he wanted to pay us. So it was me and two other guys in the neighborhood who shared my passion for comic books. And we drew and painted this mural, and the guy never paid us, and he refused to pay us. So it left a bad taste in my mouth. It's funny how when you're young, how certain things can make you go away from doing that. And like I said, it left a really bad taste in my mouth. And that was during the time I was heavily into school. I was doing well. I was reading the comic books. But after this, this guy took advantage of us. I kind of stopped drawing for a long time.
And for those who will read the book, this is in Detroit, where you grew up.
I grew up in Detroit, yes.
So let's fast forward a little bit. Well, actually, I got one other question. With the reading aspect, you talked about how you read about Frederick Douglass because he was your namesake.
Yes.
But was there a pivotal book for you that really drew you to reading and ultimately writing or wanting to write?
It was the comic books. The comic books started me on that path because I enjoyed the artwork, but I enjoyed the storylines just as much as I enjoyed the artwork. So I would write comic book stories, science fiction stories. While I was in high school, I wrote a science fiction story that my teacher read, and she was so impressed with it, she wanted to enter it into a statewide science fiction writing contest. So I had pretty good skills from an early age when it came to writing, and also when it came to drawing. I just liked writing more because when you write, you can be anyone that you want to be. You can create anything that you want. You can be anywhere that you want to be. Even though my first book, and I say it because I do plan on writing additional books. The first book is a true life story. It's a memoir because I felt that I needed to share the things that I went through with other people, because a lot of people didn't know my journey and how filled it was with pitfalls. And there's a lot of kids going through the same thing that I went through that may not catch the breaks that I caught, that may not stay on the course that I stayed on. And hopefully this book, if someone reads it that's at a crossroads, they'll understand that, there are other avenues available, that you don't have to, cut your nose off to spite your face, so to say. And that's ultimately why I wrote that book. The next book I want to write probably a fiction book, but based on real life events. There's a lot of things going on in the world that I don't like, that I don't think gets enough attention, like child abductions. I find it appalling that so many kids go missing every year, and it's not a bigger story than it is. And I think that's something that I want to dive into.
So fast forwarding a little bit, obviously in the book, you went from an advanced student entering high school at 12. Let's just say that it's worth reading because it kind of took a turn, but you ended up in the Marine Corps. How did you decide to go in the Marine Corps? Did you have any military in your family?
I only had one person on my father's side, my Uncle Donnie. He was in the Army. He was in Vietnam. He was an MP. But I never dreamed of going into the military. Something happened traumatic, and I realized that, wow, I almost died here. And if I don't change, if I don't get away, the next time I might not be so lucky. So I just happened to be walking on the street one day. A major street in Detroit is Grand River, and I grew up not right off of Grand River, as a matter of fact. And I was walking down the street and I saw a recruiting office, and I just went in and I joined the Marine Corps because I had to get away. And a month later I was gone.
Were you thinking at that time that it might be a career for you?
No, I wasn't, man. I just wanted to get away. Beyond that, I didn't think. I just wanted to get away from.
It was just a way out of Detroit.
Just a way out of Detroit, yeah.
Now, one of the questions I had, and somebody who's been in the Marine Corps and been in the military might know the answer to this, but you actually, even though you were living in and growing up in Detroit, you went to boot camp at Camp Pendleton.
Yes.
Shouldn't you have gone to Parris Island?
I was given a choice. Michigan is kind of like, it's in the middle, right? Where some people that are recruited from Michigan go to Camp Lejeune, right? And some people go to Camp Pendleton. So I was actually given a choice by the recruiter. And to me, it was a no-brainer. I get to go and see palm trees and the ocean and beaches. Yeah, oh yeah, sign me up. California? Yeah, I want to go there. So that's how I ended up in California.
So what year did you go into the Marine Corps?
1980.
And you ended up doing how many years total?
I did 3 years active and 3 years reserve.
Now, there was a point, though, that more kind of life-driven circumstances, you decided, hey, let me stick this out and maybe look at making it a career.
Yeah.
But the Marine Corps wouldn't allow it. What happened with that?
I was a knucklehead. Even though I wanted to get away from Detroit, and by joining the Marine Corps, I still was kind of, I didn't really like authority, and I did some things where I got in trouble, busted in rank a couple of times. But I met a woman during I had been in for maybe 2.5 years, and I met a woman, and she was from Compton, California, and I ended up marrying her. And I said, well, perhaps I need to just make this a career. I have a wife now, and then she got pregnant, and then I knew that I had to try to make it a career because now, I have a wife and I got a baby coming that I have to take care of, right? So when it came time for me to re-enlist, they wouldn't let me because I had been reduced in rank twice, and they didn't feel that the Marine Corps was a good fit for me, even though I knew that I had put my feet in the right direction. I had purpose now. I knew that I was going to be a good Marine because I had the capabilities to be a good Marine because I had been, every time I got demoted, I was promoted again within 3 months, right? So I knew that I had the capability. And once I decided that I needed to stay in because of my growing family, they wouldn't let me. So, but I wasn't thrown out of the Marine Corps. They just wouldn't let me re-enlist. So I got out with an honorable discharge, and I still had to do my 3 years as a reserve. So even though they didn't let me stay in as active, if war would have broke out,
they were still going to get you for their 3.
Yeah, they would have called me back for those 3. So, that's what happened. So when I got out, and with my new wife, we lived with her mother in Compton for a period, and I started filling out applications at City Hall. But I still, never thought about being a police officer, right? Because of the dealings that I had with police officers as a youth. So yeah, being a cop, I didn't want to do that.
You specifically say that in the book, that you applied for every position at the City of Compton, and you drew the line though at applying for police officer.
Yeah, I didn't want to do that. So my ex-wife's mother, she was charging us to live with her. So the money that I had saved up while I was a Marine, it eventually ran out. And she told me, unless I could continue paying, I would have to leave because she wouldn't have a man living in her house that wasn't, paying his fair share of the money. So she kicked me out, but my wife and my daughter, they got to stay. And I kind of bummed around for a little while, was out of money, and then Greyhound went on strike. And Greyhound used to be a huge industry, right? Huge industry. And when they went on strike, they started hiring, right? And, I crossed the picket line and I got a job. I was a scab, but I needed money. And I got a job as a janitor. So, I was working there midnights. And I also got another job as a security guard, right? And it was kind of like a satellite security company. And they would send security officers out to different stores like J.J. Newberry. That's a old-timey store. I don't think they're in business anymore. And they would send you to grocery stores and, as needed, right? So I was working 2 jobs, working in all, 2 full-time jobs, 8 hours a day at each job. So I was tired a lot of times. And while I was working at Greyhound, this guy, I worked at the terminal downtown, which was a huge terminal. It was a major hub. I think it was at 7th and Los Angeles Street. And, I was unloading the bus, and this guy came up the ramp from the streets, and he snatched the bag, and he started running away. And, I hear this lady screaming, and I look up, and, she's pointing, and I look toward where she's pointing. This guy running down the ramp with her luggage. So I chased the guy down. I didn't even think about it. I don't even know why I did it. I just, knew it wasn't right. Even despite the way I grew up, I knew what that guy did wasn't right. So I ran down, I chased him down, held him. The cops came and arrested him, gave the lady her bag back. And she had a couple of kids with her. And man, she hugged me as hard as I've ever been hugged. The kids were hugging on my legs, and they were crying and telling me how much they, I even get emotional right now when I talk about it. But, I got the impression that everything they had in the world,
was in that
suitcase, right? And they had just come up from Mexico. So they were trying to make a way here in the United States. And it seemed like everything they had in that suitcase, everything they had in life was in that suitcase, and I got it back for them. And it made me feel so good that, it's kind of like, dude, maybe I had been doing the wrong stuff all along. You know what I mean? Good people. There's a lot of good people in this world. And you need good people to stand up for those that can't stand up for themselves, against evil, right? And right then at that point, I realized that I had been walking on the side of evil, and I wasn't doing anybody any good, right? And now that I tasted the other side and saw how it uplifted other people, it made me feel good. And that's when I first started thinking about, well, maybe I can be a cop, because this is what cops are supposed to do. They're supposed to help people that can't help themselves. No matter what, the media portrays now about law enforcement, it's not what we're about. We're about helping people and standing up for those people that can't stand up for themselves. I don't give a damn what the media says. That's what it's always been about. And that's what it'll always be about.
You do a great job of describing it in the book of your experience in your law enforcement career, but it is about doing the right thing. It's not about the badge and the gun. It's about the people that you're dealing with. And at the end of the day, not forgetting that you are just another person, just like them.
Just like them. The reason why I titled this book Black, White, and Gray All Over is because that's the way my life was, both personally and professionally. I was on the dark side. I was on the light side. A lot of times I walked down the middle, which is the gray area, which you hear a lot of people talk about. And I knew that once I wrote the book, I actually had the title for the book long before I even started writing about it. It was just something that resonated with me because that's the way my life had always been. And once I became a police officer, it followed me because there's nowhere is the gray area more important than in law enforcement. You have to enforce the law, but you don't always have to enforce the law, right? You have to be able to recognize someone that's going through something and realize that what you do to them could make what they're going through even worse in the future, right? Because sometimes people make mistakes. They're not bad people. They just make mistakes. And if you don't help them out, then you'll compound that mistake and maybe make them go on to become something that they really weren't supposed to be because they have no other alternatives, right? So in that regard, cops have a lot of power, for change in the community. Like in the book, I talk about how crack affected, particularly the Black community, by, by, just because someone has a drug problem doesn't make them a bad person, right? So they had these draconian laws for crack, right? Where if you get caught with a $20 piece of crack, you can go to prison for 3 or 4 years, right? Was that justice? I don't know that it was, because when you arrest someone that has a problem, that has an addiction, you take them out of the home, particularly a male figure. You take them out of the home, then you have children in the home that don't have any guidance. And now they're upset at law enforcement because they took their father out of the home. And then they belong to the streets. And then they go to the streets. So a lot of times we ended up compounding problems. Now, the ones that were out there selling it and shooting people and robbing people, those are the ones you have to deal with, right? But that's that gray area, again, that I talk about. You have to learn how to navigate it. And you have to, ultimately, cops are here for the betterment of the community. We're not just here, to have, astronomical arrest stats. Yeah, I arrested 100 people last month, right? Yeah, but how many lives did you change?
Right.
You know what I mean? If there's some people that definitely don't need to walk the streets with us, and I don't care what anyone says, there are people that do not need to walk the streets with us. And those are the ones that we, or them, since I'm retired, cops need to be going after, not the ones that need a helping hand, because we're here to help the community. And we help the community by taking evil off the streets, but we also help the community by empowering those that need help. And I think that's where a lot of cops lose sight of how to police.
One of the things that I will add to that I really respect you for is somebody listening right now may think that you're painting this picture of you were the knight on the white horse and came in and wrote Save the Day and everything you did was perfect. You don't paint yourself as a saint. You talk about your deficiencies and your I'll call them failures. So I really, respect the fact that you're putting it out there as it is, but you do talk about your law enforcement career in that it was about treating the people the way they deserve to be treated.
Right. Despite my failings in my personal life, I drank too much. I cheated on my wife. I gambled.
Funny story that you in the book, you talk about being in a gambling hall on both sides of the fence.
Yes.
But both times you were gambling.
And both times I was gambling. Yeah. And both times I came away with my life. But, I had a lot of personal failings. I wasn't the best father that I could be. I thought I was being the best father because, I had a good job and I was making money and the kids got what they needed. They had medical and dental benefits. They had a place to live, nice place to live. But I wasn't giving them me. I wasn't giving them the emotional things that they needed. And while I was growing up, I didn't get either, right? I didn't get the emotional things that I needed. And a lot of times I didn't get the material things that I needed. So I thought that I was doing right by my kids by at least giving them the material things that they needed. It took me a long time to understand that the emotional things are more important than the material things. And I fell short as a father in that regard. But the one place where I could be good, where I could always get it right, was at work, right? When I put on the uniform and I went out there to help people and I went out there to protect people, I could always get it right because no one got to see my personality conflicts. No one got to see the emotional weaknesses that I had, because I was given to others without revealing myself to them. But when you deal with family and you're dealing with your life on a personal level, nothing is concealed, right? Everybody knows who you are. So your family's always able to recognize your shortcomings. And that's basically what I was dealing with. So that gray area that I dealt with at work, I was dealing with it on a personal level too. And, it was difficult for me to navigate the gray area.
But any of us who have worked in law enforcement for any time know that we have so many other partners of our so many of our partners who are dealing with the same things. And almost to a negative, we keep all of our personal stuff bottled up, whether it's family issues. You talk about, the death of Kevin and Jimmy and how you dealt with it in the bottom of a bottle. That's how the environment teaches us to deal with things, is keep your personal stuff bottled up inside.
Yes. Yeah. Because, I don't know how it is now for cops. I would pray that it's getting better. But during the time that I worked as a cop, to reveal your personal failings was seen as a sign of weakness. You had to be, the tough guy. You had to be the tough girl all the time, right? Or 20 dead people in a month, no big deal. I'm ready for 21. Gunshot victims every day. Don't worry about it. Wrap it up. Let's go. Let's go eat. And you go from a baby death to a restaurant where you're laughing and joking, right? Like the baby death didn't affect you, right?
But you're laughing and joking, though, to put a mask on it actually bothering you.
Yeah, and you're not laughing and joking about the baby death per se, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to bury it deep inside of you. You're trying to, conceal all that trauma. But what we don't realize during that time is that trauma, it may be concealed, but it's always there, right? And it's bubbling underneath the surface. And sooner or later, it's gonna blow. And when it blows, how you deal with it is how your career will ultimately end up. Because I never realized that, not a lot of cops actually retire on a longevity, right? I just took it for granted. Like, okay, I'm going to be a cop for 30 years. Then I'm going to retire. I'm going to ride off into the sunset, smoke cigars, and drink tequila in my backyard, right? But then I found out that, God, probably less than 50% of cops, right? And that might even be a high percentage, but less than 50% of cops actually retire on a longevity 30-year career and are able to get out relatively with their emotions intact, right?
Well, you bring up a great point, which was my catalyst for this podcast, was when I started doing the research and really seeing, both from the law enforcement and military side, there's a greater number that don't make it to quote unquote retirement.
Right.
And that was the catalyst for me to hopefully start getting the word out. You need to be thinking today about your tomorrow, because tomorrow's not guaranteed.
Right.
Ideally, yes. If doing a career is what you want to do, more power to you, and I hope you make it there.
Right.
Things get in the way, injuries, family, whatever,
yes,
that will derail that.
You're absolutely correct. And also, we have to take care of ourselves while we're working, because you don't know just how much that stress is building up inside of you and how it eventually could end up, killing you. Right. Another statistic I didn't realize is that of the cops that do retire, most of them don't live 5 years after retirement. Right. So you work all these years to get to the finish line, and then you got 5 years before you die. Right. And most of the time is because of things related to the job. And when I retired in 2017. I had a heart attack in 2020, almost died. 2 weeks ago, I had another heart procedure. And I know that it's a culmination, or a combination, I should say, of the things that I dealt with personally and professionally, not being able to have an outlet for them. Because normally when there's a lot of stress built up in your professional life, you can release it in your personal life, right? But when there's no release, it stays inside of you, and eventually it will come out. And stress does play a part in health issues. That's why, if I could tell the viewers anything, is make sure you eat right and you exercise, right? Because while I was working, I was in pretty good shape, and I worked out a lot. When I started having the personal issues with my oldest son, that's when things started going downhill. I stopped working out. I was stressed out a lot, and that's when I started having the health issues. And it's because I wasn't taking care of myself. See, but we have it within we have the power within ourselves to make sure that we don't get these health issues if we take care of our bodies. And that's very, very important. And I think a lot of old time cops, they didn't adhere to that, because a workout, the stress release to them was choir practice after work, a case of beer in the back lot, drinking and talking about, the crazy things that they saw while they were at work. And then they would get in their car and drive off drunk. Okay. It just is what it is. As you said in the book, I don't sugarcoat things. I'm not going to sugarcoat things here with you now. And cops, a lot of times they want to portray themselves as superheroes. I never did anything wrong. I was the greatest cop. I wasn't afraid. I just went out there every day and, people were afraid of me and I just helped everyone. Well, that's bullshit. It's not true. Cops have a lot of flaws, and the good cops are able to recognize those flaws and able to compensate for them. And that's what I try to do as a cop. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. Sometimes I went to work with a chip on my shoulder. Sometimes, I wasn't as professional with people that I should have been. But I was able to recognize that. And I'd walk away from it and say, damn, that I didn't do that right, And the next time I would try to do it better, right? And if any cop says that they never was unprofessional or never were unprofessional with anyone that they came in contact with, that's a lie, especially if they worked a lengthy career, because we have personalities.
So let's talk about your first venture into testing for law enforcement when you finally crossed that bridge and you went and tested for LAPD and gave the perfect answer in the oral board question.
Yeah. I thought I was killing that interview, man. They were asking me questions and I was bang, 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 answering all the questions. And the lady, she asked me a question about a traffic stop, right? I'm on patrol. I stop an old lady, for speeding or whatever. And I walk up to the car and ask for her license. And, she curses me out, spits at me, rolls up the window. What would you do? Right.
For anybody about to listen to this is not the textbook proper answer.
This is not the textbook proper answer, but it was the answer that I gave based on my experience growing up in Detroit with the cops, because some of those cops in Detroit, they didn't have the proper ethos, I should say, in regard to dealing with people in the inner city. So I just gave the answer based on things that I had seen. And when she asked what I would do, I said, I'd take out my nightstick and break the window or drag her out and arrest her. And, they promptly stood up and said, thanks for coming in. Don't call us, we'll call you. And that was it, and I'm walking away. I'm like, well, shit, I thought that's what they wanted to hear, right? That's what the cops are doing, right? And, actually the real, correct answer is call your supervisor out, right? But
probably a little bit of the Marine Corps in that also, not doing as you were told.
Yeah, that's right. So that was a life lesson for me. So and then ended up being an LAPD officer.
So what year did you go into the academy?
I went to the academy in November of 1985. Yeah, because I graduated on Valentine's Day of 86. So.
A long, illustrious career, 27 years?
And as a cop, 32.
32 years, my mistake. The book chronicles your time as the majority of your career was at Compton. You went through the transition when Compton stopped being their own police department and the transition to the LA Sheriff's Department. I highly recommend anybody taking the time to read this book. There's some great stories, and any of us who have been in law enforcement for any length of time can relate to a lot of the characters. You do a great job of portraying the character of the people that you worked with, and really bringing them to life. So I give you respect for that also.
Appreciate it.
You had some very unique experiences. What I want to go into more, though, is the writing process. So you talk about in the book of kind of starting out that this was pen to paper. Mm-hmm. It was such a lengthy process and ended with you typing on a computer.
Right.
What's your writing process like? How often were you writing during all of this?
When I first started, I would handwrite it in cursive, and I kept a little journal, and I would jot down stories, things that were interesting to me, things that I remembered from my childhood. And then I would, put it away because life got in the way, and, I would come back to it a year later or whenever I got a chance to come back to it. And while I was working, the interesting cases and the interesting events that were going on in my career, I would keep the reports. I would make copies of the reports, right? So that, I knew what I wanted to write about. And I knew that if I had copies of the report, it would be easy to write about rather than, trying to break my brain trying to remember these things. And when I retired, I sat down in earnest and I started typing, right? And I started transferring the written word onto the keyboard. And I had a really, really easy time writing it. It kind of flowed, but I went through a lot of paper because I left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor, because when you're writing, you have to, the most important thing is making sure that it flows, right? And if you're writing a biography or a memoir, you have to make sure that you're telling the truth, right? Because if you're trying to make shit up, people will sniff it out, right? So that's what I wanted more than anything. I wanted it to be authentic, even at the cost of portraying myself in an unfavorable light, because I knew I'm not a hero, right? I was a man, and sometimes I did heroic things, right? I wasn't perfect. I was imperfect, and sometimes I did perfect things, right? So what I wanted to do, I wanted to portray that so that the reader would be able to understand it, because I knew that the only stories that people actually like to read are things that they can relate to, right? No one likes to read about the super heroic person, despite what we would like to think of ourselves. So like I said, I left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor, stuff that didn't work, stuff that, that didn't flow with what I was trying to do. And I knew that I wanted to go back and forth between my personal and my professional life, because I knew that would be a good way to tell the story, right? And a lot of times when you read a cop book, you don't get that involved in the cop's personal life. So I started it off, obviously, with the story of Kevin Burrell and James McDonald, which was probably the most difficult thing that I had to deal with as a police officer. And actually, when I first started writing the book, I wanted that to be what the book was about. I just wanted to write the book about the Burrell and McDonald murders. But then it grew to much more than that. And I said, in order for me to tell this true story, I have to tell the entire story. So that's why I went back to my childhood and where I was born and how I was raised. And, throughout the majority of the book, I intermingled my personal and private, my personal and professional lives throughout the book until the end. And I ended the book the way it started, on a personal note. So I got a job in 2019 while I was writing this book. And I had almost typed out the whole thing. When I first wrote it, it was like 500 pages, right? So I had typed it out and I would print it out and I would edit it and go through it. I don't like this. I would line it out, and then revise what I had written.
Did you do all of the editing yourself, or was there a point where you brought in an outside editor?
The majority of the editing I did myself. What I would do, once I printed it out, I got a job as a driver and a bodyguard for a guy by the name of Clarence Avant, who lived in Beverly Hills. And you may have heard of him recently. His wife was murdered in Beverly Hills by the guy who ran up in the house, right? She was the philanthropist, right? So I actually worked for them in 2019. And then when COVID came, they didn't have a need for me because they wouldn't leave the house. So I didn't work for them anymore. So I stopped working for them in 2020. But the majority of the editing that I did was while I was parked in their driveway. I would take the printed copy and I would edit it, come back home and revise it. And then after I stopped working for them, I had a heart attack in 2020 and, almost died, right? I had 100% blockage. So they did emergency surgery. I recovered. But I remember when I was lying in my hospital room, I thought, all this work I put in on this damn book. And I almost died before I finished it, right? You know, so when I got better, I dedicated myself to just, you know, I just put my nose to the grindstone. I said, let me finish this thing. So I finished it, and then I found a publishing company, and the publishing company offered everything. They offered editing, they offered printing, they offered, you know, the cover concept, but I had already hired someone for the printing concept, for the cover concept, so they didn't have to do that. But they did do the fine line editing. And so they would edit the book, send it back to me, and I would, you know, say, I don't like this, and take this out, and I would send it back to them, and then they would edit. So we went back and forth with that for about 2 or 3 months until they sent me a version that I liked. And it still had 1 or 2 mistakes in it, but I wanted the book released on August 18th, because that's the day my father died, right? And I dedicated this book to my father. So I wanted the release date on August 18th. So when they sent it back to me, I said, there's 2 mistakes in here that I need changed. And they said, well, we don't know if we change it, I don't know if we can get it out by August 18th. So I said, well, the mistakes weren't that big of a deal. It was more important for me to have it published on the day my father died. So I said, let's just go with it. And that's how it ended up getting published.
So before I go forward with my next questions on that, I want to go backwards a little bit, in that writing is so important to you. And in the book, you talk about dealing with some of your stressors, especially the deaths you've experienced with alcohol. But was writing ever an outlet for you to release some of that depression and anxiety?
Not until I started this book. You know, like I said, I would keep a journal and write about, you know, not personal things, but professional things that happened, so that if I ever did sit down and decide to write a book, I would have these things on hand, you know, just like a cop, you know, when you go out to a scene and you take notes and you bring the notes back and you write your report, right? That's essentially what I was doing. And with the journal, I was taking notes for when I wrote my report, which the report is the book. But as far as the personal aspects of the book, no, man, I didn't. And once I sat down and I started writing it, and I realized the way I wanted to write it, you know, it was therapeutic for me, because I wrote about things that I had never spoken about before. I wrote about things that I had never told anyone about. And when, you know, a couple of times I was crying, you know, when I wrote it, especially after I would print it out and read it, you know, it had like this huge emotional effect on me, right? Like realizing that, you know, my father, I loved him to death, but he was old school stoic kind of guy. He never told me he loved me, right? And I never told him I loved him, you know. And when I'm writing this, it becomes, you know, painfully obvious to me that I was missing that emotional attachment to my father. And things like that would make me cry when I wrote the book. When I wrote about how I ended up adopting my son, when I wrote about, you know, how he was diagnosed with what he has, you know, all those things made me cry, you know. And so, yeah, I realized that, fuck, this is, you know, it's like I'm talking to a psychiatrist, right? But instead of actually speaking to someone, I was talking to the computer. I was talking to the keyboard. And once I finished and I got the book, the first copy in the mail, it was such a relief. You know, it was like I had been in therapy, even though I never have spoken to one, which I probably should have for all the shit I've seen in my life. When I got the book, it was like I was done with my sessions with my therapist, and the book helped me in that regard. And I think a lot of cops, not just cops, but military personnel too, I think if they have a hard time speaking to someone about things that has traumatized them, they might want to pick up a pen and a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper or a keyboard and just write about it, you know, because it's just as therapeutic. You never know how good it'll make you feel or how much something stressed you out until you actually write about it. And that's what I did. So that would be the advice I can give. You know, if you don't want to talk about something to someone, write about it.
Going back a little bit more into the book, you talking about the writing aspect, you've got a funny story in there about working with a partner who, even though he had gone to college, his writing wasn't the best. And so you basically, hey, you arrest him, I'll write it. But law enforcement, for any of us who've done it, doesn't lend itself to creative writing. It's usually, hey, get that report done, move on to the next one.
Right.
Did you find that was a struggle for you through your career, that you really wanted to kind of write in more detail?
Yeah, I did. I had to learn how to tone down the simple reports, like residential burglary with no evidence, no leads. You know, I mean, I would write like everything I saw when I got to the house, and the story like, "Hey, you're taking too long on this report." So I had to learn how to scale that back. But once I got to detectives, it was like, "Oh, okay, now I can write." You know, when I got to homicide, it was like, "Oh, this is where I need to be. I can write." You know, I'll tell you, when you read one of my homicide reports, it's like you're standing at the scene of the crime, right? And they love that. And I had found my niche, and that's why I think I did so well in homicide, because when the district attorneys would read my report, there wasn't room for interpretation. It was there, right? And I really enjoyed that. And when you talk about the guy that went to college that didn't write that well, yeah, we find all kind, and every agency has someone like that. And one of the things that I've found, with this book is that for the sake of being as real as I could, not everybody is fond of the way they were depicted in the book, right? Some people are, some people aren't, but it is what it is. You know, I had one guy, he asked, "Hey man, why'd you call me fat in the book?" I said, "Dude, really?" You know what I mean? So some people have very high opinions of themselves until they look in the mirror or they see it in print. So, yeah.
You made a comment prior to, or a little bit back, about talking about the flow of a book. Mm-hmm. And the one that really stands out to me, and you've got a lot of great stories about the Compton, and I'll even refer to it as coming to its heyday. Obviously, with the growth of the street gangs and hip hop music and stuff, Compton came to the forefront. People probably never heard of Compton before that. But as far as the flow, there's one part in the book where you talk about you had to audit the narcotics locker.
Yes.
I'll be honest with you, reading that you could almost take that section out and put it in a nonfiction book, and you would think that, oh, what's the next corner going to be? Because that's how it flowed. It had just the nuance of it and the little changes, like, oh, well, then we went and talked to this person. It read with great flow. I mean, I don't want to give it up, but there's definitely a flow in that section that I specifically remember.
Yeah, that was that was an ugly part of my department's history. It doesn't mean that the entire department was rooted in corruption, but there was at least one, more than likely several, that were involved in corruption in the department, and I was involved in investigating. I was threatened. People egged my car, called my house. It was a difficult time for me, especially when you work for a small department. Everyone knows each other. Everyone. We go to each other's houses. We all hang out at the same places. Some cliques are closer than others, but the overall clique of the department, everyone knows each other, right? And it's difficult investigating someone, when you're in that type of situation, and feathers get ruffled, and you try to do the best that you can do, but inevitably there's going to be some people that aren't happy with you. But I was good with that because as long as I stayed true to myself, I didn't have a problem with it. Especially at that point in my life, because I had met my wife, right? And you know, she was that one stabilizing, you know, force in my life that I needed to help me point my feet in the right direction. And she kept me grounded. And I had her, and she was good for me, and she was good for my kids. And you know, we built a great life together, and she was what I needed. And as long as I had her during that time, I didn't care what everybody else thought. I just knew that I had, you know, to do what I was supposed to do. And ultimately, it didn't end up the way that I would have liked it to have ended up, but it stopped what was going on. And I just have to make my peace with that.
I mentioned the growth of hip hop and Compton coming to the forefront. You touch on briefly the Biggie and Tupac murders, but you also did bodyguarding work for guys like Dr. Dre. What was that like?
It was great. Dr. Dre is a phenomenal guy. Okay, he all he wanted to do was make music, and he was very, very good at it. I mean, obviously, you can see the success that he's experiencing now. But ultimately, there was a lot of shady characters that were a part of it. And it wasn't just for that particular music company, the Death Row Records company. Most of these agencies, there's a lot of shady stuff that goes on around them, right? And I just couldn't be a part of it because I couldn't walk that line, you know. So as much as I would have loved if Dr. Dre would have said, "Hey, I want you to be my full-time bodyguard. Come with me." I don't know. I may have went with him, you know, because he wasn't involved in the shady stuff, right? He was a totally legit musician, and you know, if he wanted me to be his full-time bodyguard, I would have did it, but he never asked. So,
did you get to go any other place further than New York with him?
Went to Miami.
Never. Did you ever get to leave the country with him?
No. I didn't work for them that long. Probably about maybe 7 months, 8 months.
What was traveling like in that environment? Are you treated well, or?
Yeah, because you know, I think what they wanted initially was to have law enforcement to kind of give us some kind of legitimacy, right? Because the shady element, they didn't want to be involved with the law enforcement officers, and you know, they thought that the cops would help keep the artists out of trouble. Which, bottom line, the artists were the money, right? You don't want your artists getting in trouble, so you know, we have these cops around, and they'll keep the artists in line and keep them from getting in trouble, and you know, keep people from picking on them. And now you can see they just had a concert where a rapper got stabbed in the neck and was killed. You know, cops won't do it anymore. I mean, at least the smart one won't.
You talk a lot about I don't want to call them downfalls. Compton had its issues. Compton PD had its issues. The city of Compton had its issues. Before the transition occurred to the sheriff's department, was there ever a point in your career where you kind of went, you know what, maybe I should walk away? Because you talk about a bunch of the officers who had left through all that. Was that ever a thought for you?
No, I never thought about going to another agency. I thought that I was going to ride it out. I felt that all agencies had their issues of some kind, but I felt that I could make a career at that department. And, you know, like I said, I wanted to be a homicide investigator. And by that point, I was a homicide investigator. I eventually became the officer in charge of the unit. And, you know, I just, in a city that was besieged by homicides, being a homicide investigator, I mean, where else would you want to be? So I wanted to stay there. I wanted to ride it out because, you know, I believed in that department, and I believed in what they were supposed to be doing for the community, because that community needed a lot of help. No community needed policing worse than Compton, right? Because, you know, those people were in fear, right? They were living in fear. So when the sheriff's department started, making inroads into Compton, and when it became, in my opinion, inevitable that it was going to happen, I knew that I had to make sure that the cops that went from Compton to the sheriff's department got the best deal that they could get. And I was actually on the negotiation team with the sheriff's department and the city to talk about how our guys were going to be coming over, and salary and wages and benefits and all of that. So ultimately, we ended up getting the best deal that any agency ever got from the sheriff's department. So yeah, I think most of the people were happy. And I went to the sheriff's department and I did well. I did very well. When all was said and done, I worked for the sheriff's department longer than I worked for the Compton Police Department. I was at Compton for 14 years and the sheriff's department for 17. And I worked some of the best assignments at the sheriff's department, even though the sheriff's department didn't have that high of an opinion of Compton PD personnel. It was always headbutting between the two agencies. A lot of the sheriffs thought that Compton cops were crooked or were dumb or incompetent. So when we went over, there was some apprehension, right? But I knew what I was doing, right? I knew that I knew how to do police work. I knew that I was a good investigator, and I knew that if I went to the sheriff's department and just did what they paid me to do, I was going to be okay. And I was. I worked the gang unit. I worked internal affairs. I worked homicide at the sheriff's department, and got dozens of commendations while I was there. And I had a very good career, and I'm grateful to the sheriff's department for giving me an opportunity to work there.
When you got close to retirement, what was your transition plan? What were you thinking you were going to do post-retirement, other than writing a book? My son Dominic, not Dominic, but Desmond. All right, that was a Freudian slip. My son Desmond, I knew that he was going to require a lot of time, right? So my wife and I knew that we wanted a bigger house than the one we were living in, because we lived in Long Beach. It's a nice house in a decent neighborhood, but it was small. It was like 1,800 square feet. And when all the kids would get there, it became overcrowded. So my wife and I said, okay, when we retire, let's get a bigger house so that all the kids and the grandkids can come, and, we can have grandma and grandpa's house. So that was our goal, to make sure that we had, a nice retirement home in a good school district, right? Because Desmond, he's young, right? And we knew that he was going to be going to school for 10 years after I retire. So we wanted a good school district. So my wife researched the school district in the area we live in now, and she saw it was one of the better ones. And we started looking for homes out here, and we found a house. And for the first year that I retired, it was my job to get the house ready, right? So I lived here by myself, and we still had the house in Long Beach because my youngest daughter was a senior in high school, and we didn't want to take her out of the school that she was in her last year, and take her away from all her friends and have her graduate from a totally different school. So they stayed down there for my daughter's senior year while I stayed here and get this house ready for when they moved up here eventually. And once my daughter graduated, she's in college now. We moved up here full time, and just getting this house ready kept me real busy. So, how many books would you say you'd have to write before you, or maybe you already do? Do you consider yourself an author and then a police officer, or are you still a police officer and then an author?
Wow, that's a very good question. I think I'm always going to be a police officer at heart. One of the most difficult things now for me, especially with all the cops getting shot and assaulted, I've never seen anything like this in my life. It's like every day a cop is getting killed or, shot at her. And every time that happens, I think about Kevin and Jimmy, right? I go back to that night. And, it's difficult for me, right? And my heart bleeds for every police officer that gets shot or every police officer that gets killed, because I know what their families and their their peers are going through it because I went through it. So now in this day and age, I go through it every day with them, right? So, I have to have an outlet, and my outlet is, the family and writing. So I'll always consider myself a police officer that writes.
So somebody who's interested in becoming an author, the one thing you talked about that I kind of paused you on, I want to go back into it, is what's the process like trying to find a publisher? Is it an easy process, a lengthy process?
It's a lengthy process, especially like the traditional publishing companies. It's hard to get a book published by them because, first of all, most of the time you have to be an established author, and they'll give you a royalty up front, and they'll say, write this book. You'll submit an idea to them. They say, okay, we like it. Here's a royalty. Write the book. And when you finish with the book, they give you the rest of the money, and then they publish it, right? When you go through what's called an independent publisher, that's one of the smaller publishing companies, they'll offer you a lot of incentives, like we'll do promotions, we'll do your book cover, we'll get your copyright, your ISBN number, we'll do editing, we'll do print on demand for you, but you got to pay, right? And it can be expensive, $10,000 or more to write a book and get it published. And a lot of people don't have that kind of money, to invest in themselves. And then you have the companies that will do it for less, but they won't give you 100% of your royalties, right? They'll take a huge chunk. So if you're selling a book for $16.99 and it's going through Amazon, Amazon's going to take a percentage. Then the publishing company is going to take a percentage, and you might get $4 off for every $16.99 that you sell. And a lot of people don't think that's fair because it's your baby. You did the work, right? And I understand it. So knowing that I'm a first-time author and I'm not going to get a huge publishing company, to publish my book, and knowing that I don't want to share all my money with another publishing company, I went through the one where I get my 100% royalty fees, and I invested in myself, basically. And I'm happy with the publishing company that I went through because they put out a very good product, and they print on demand, and the book looks good.
Did they have to read the entire manuscript before they agreed to publish it?
No. They will publish anything that you want as long as you pay them. They don't care. And that's what it is. What they provide you is guidance and editing, right? And there's a couple of different editing styles, like line editing, copy editing, proofreading. I think the copy editing is the most intensive editing process because they will actually restructure and reformat your paragraphs in addition to proofreading and line editing. So that's a pretty intensive one and probably the most expensive one. But if you're a decent writer, the editing isn't that extensive. And the editing work that they did on mine, it wasn't like they had to take a hatchet job to it. It was misspelled words and grammatical mistakes for the most part, but there was no restructuring of what I wrote.
The route that you went, do you give up or did you retain all rights to your book?
I retain all rights.
And that's part of the process of tracking down a publisher?
Yes, you have to know what you want. That's another thing that some publishing companies, they might put in the contract that if your book becomes a TV show or a movie or something, they'll get, the proceeds from it or, the majority of the proceeds from it. And, some people, I guess, are desperate enough that they'll do that, but I didn't want to give up the rights to what I wrote. One of the things that my wife, she loves the book and we talk about it a lot. And one of the things that she mentioned just the other day was, what you've done with this book, right? I said, no, what have I done? She said, you've created a legacy for our kids. I said, wow, I never even thought about that. She goes, yeah, when, we have to put this in our in our will, you know. I said, why? She says, because people will probably be buying this book long after you're dead and the money's got to go somewhere. And I had never thought about that, right? But that's one thing that you want. And if if a publishing company has the rights to all future works, then you deprive your kids of your legacy. So that was one of the things that I wanted in my contract. And that's why I invested in myself, because I wanted my 100% royalties. I'm going to pay you up front, but I want my royalties. And I also want to retain all rights to this work for now and for the future. So that's something that, you know, if someone watching this is considering as far as writing a book, that's something that you definitely, you know, want to make sure that you have, you know.
Now, you talk about your future books being more nonfiction. You've got some ideas along the science fiction line.
Yeah.
When an idea comes to your head, how quickly do you start putting down those ideas? Or,
you know, what in this age of technology, now you can just pull out your phone and, you know, if you got an idea, just record it, right? So you don't lose it. Because one thing about writing, man, that's why it's so easy to tell when someone plagiarizes something, okay? Because you can never write again something that you wrote before, right? If I wrote this book again from scratch, it wouldn't be what it is now. It would be different, right? Because I can't remember exactly what I wrote, right? And the style and the manner and the way that it flowed, right? So when you're writing something or when you come up with an idea, you have to get it down on paper or somewhere right away, because if you don't, and 2 weeks later you try to remember what you wanted to write, you can't. You just can't. And that's why, you know, people can't copy stuff and say this is mine. It's like, well, no, it's not. You copy this. That's why it's so easy. So that's what I try to do when I come up with an idea. I try to either record it or write it down. I got a little journal. I try to write it down right away. And one of the things that I did find out in writing this book is you don't have to write it in chronological order, right? If you come up with an idea for a book, whatever thought comes to your mind, write it down. Because when you sit down to start writing your book, what you're going to do is you're going to go through what you've written down, your notes, your journals, and then you're going to write it and put it in whatever part of the book or part of the story that flows the best for you. A lot of people think when you write a book, you just have to sit down and you have to start at the beginning. Well, you don't. You can even start at the end. You can have an ending for a book and then work backwards on it to the beginning. And I didn't realize that until I was, you know, since I've published this book, I've met some established authors, and one of the guy who did the foreword for this book, his name is Ralph Pazzullo, and he's a New York Times best-selling author, and we talk a lot. And
did you know him before he wrote the foreword, or did your publisher?
No, it's a funny story, man. I met a guy on a plane when my father was sick, and I was coming back from Detroit, and he and I ended up in the same seats, and we're both big guys, so we were pushing back and forth on each other. And, you know, we started talking, and turns out that he's a retired CIA officer, right? His name is Gary Burnson. And he was flying out to LA because they were going to pitch his book to a movie company. The book is called Jawbreaker. And it's about CIA officer going after Osama bin Laden when he was in those caves in Afghanistan. So they were going to pitch a book. And he showed me the book, and it was written by a guy by the name of Ralph Pazzullo, right? And he introduced me to this author, saying that because we started talking and he found out what I did, and he said, man, you know, you probably got a good story. This guy wrote a book for me. I'm going to give you his name, introduce you to him. Maybe he can write your story. So that's how I met Ralph Pazzullo. And I contacted him when I got back to LA, and we went out to lunch a couple of times, and he started interviewing me and recording me and getting my stories. So he wanted to write it, but he works for a big publishing company, right? I mean, he's been published by everybody. So he pitched the idea, you know, their parlance. He pitched the idea to a publishing company, and they said, well, we're not hot on cop stories right now, because it was during the time when, you know, all the cop hating stuff was going on. So they didn't want any parts of a cop story. So he says, I'm sorry, man. They don't want to do this book. And then he says, you ever think about writing it yourself? I said, well, yeah, I've toyed with the idea of writing it. I got a title for it and everything. I've been taking notes. He goes, write it yourself, get it published. And
so at this point, all it was basically your notes and your memories.
Yeah. Yep. And he said, write it yourself. I said, all right, well, and I did. And when I was finished, I said, hey man, I'm done. I sent it to him. He said, man, this is a good story. And I asked him if he could write the foreword. He said, yeah, absolutely. So, he wrote the foreword. So that's how first time author was able to get a foreword by a New York Times bestselling author. So yeah, the stars were aligned.
Not to ask a cliche question, but what kind of response are you getting from the book, from the writing community? You said you've met a couple authors. Are you getting positive response from it?
Yeah. Ralph just wrote a book called Saigon. It's a memoir. It's a very good book. And he autographed it for me. And he said that I was to my friend Fred, a very talented author, which was a very high compliment coming from a best-selling author who's written, these 10 books. And the reviews are good for the book. It's won best memoir from the American Writers Association. It was a finalist in the Best Thriller Award competition.
Congratulations!
Yeah, thanks. So it's getting some very good reviews, which is kind of like I'm kind of I don't know how to take it. It's like, damn, I just wanted to write a little book, and
this is just my life story.
Yeah. But people are they like it. It's getting very good reviews, and it's selling steadily. I don't have a lot of promotion. I thank you for having me on this. So get a little promotion there, but every little bit helps. And eventually, if the word gets out and people read the book and they like it, and tell each other about it, I'll be happy with it. One professor at a university, Cal State Dominguez, he's a professor for the criminal justice program, and they made the book a part of required reading. He says he likes the social takes in the book.
They're timely. I mean, even though you're talking about stories that are 30 years old, they're still timely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's great. Now that you've been published once, is getting your next book going to be easier to get published, or will it be this kind of the same process again?
It'll be easier. If the book does well, the traditional publishers will take note and probably try to publish it. But once again, they take a percentage of your book. I think from this point on, I'll just pay to have my own books published so that I can retain all the rights. To me, it's just easier. And there's a lot of one thing I did not know, man, as far as books are concerned, is there are like 2 million books published a year, every year.
Wow.
Right?
2 million different books. 2
million different books. It's like a ridiculous number of books being published, right? So if you have a book on Amazon and it's, 120,000 as far as sales are concerned,
that's still very good.
Out of 2 million every year, yes, right? So, I mean, for all the first-time publishers out there, when they get it published, if you look at your sales ranking and it's like 100 or 200,000, don't worry about it, because there's a lot of other books out there being published. But because so many books are being published, there's a lot of publishing companies, and they call them independent publishing companies, or indies, right? And that's where I would always go. I would always go through an independent publishing company, because if you get your name out there, I don't think it'll really matter, because the promotions that these traditional publishing companies do, they charge the writers for those promotions. It comes out of the proceeds from the book, just like a musician,
right?
So I don't know. I'll do grassroots promotion, word of mouth. I don't care. I want cops to read the book, because I think they can learn from it. I think they can learn how to be a cop. I think they can learn how to deal with the pressures of being a cop, especially now in this day and age. You know, you want to be a successful cop, treat people how you want to be treated. The best advice that I can give you.
When you actually decided to write it, did you seek out a mentor?
No, I didn't.
If somebody is in your shoes, but now, you know, they're sitting there thinking, I've got a story that I want to read, can they reach out to you? And
oh, absolutely.
For advice?
Yeah, absolutely. I love helping people, you know, because there were so many times in my life when I needed help and there was no one there. You know, I promised myself that if I ever got in a position where I could help somebody, I would always help. And I do it. You know, people contact me on LinkedIn and I've never met them before and I'll help them. But, you know, in regard to seeking out a mentor, I didn't, but I had one, Ralph Pazzullo, you know, and it wasn't a traditional way of getting a mentor, but he helped me in the process.
Well, and you bring up a good point because it's all about chance happenings.
Chance.
And one final thing I'll talk about in the book is you talk about 2 incidents in your life where the same police officer, you referred to him as your guardian angel. And my only question for it is because I really, like, I can't say this enough. You really need to go and read this book. But your guardian angel, is he somebody that you stayed in contact with?
No. It was just the weirdest thing, man, how this guy was there on 2 different occasions, right? I don't know what would have happened the first time I met him if he wasn't there and believed what I told him. And I do have an idea what would have happened the second time he was there. You know, I may have lost my career.
2 very pivotal moments in your life that had a significant bearing on your future and your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we all need helping hands at different times in our lives. And the way things happen sometimes, you just have to go with it. You can't question it. You know, some things were just meant to happen. And, you know, the guy that was with me, he's one of my best friends to this day. Still keep in contact with him. But it was just weird.
I wish you the best going forward. Like I've said this before, anybody who's been in law enforcement will be able to relate to the characters in your, and they're not characters in the sense they're fabricated. They're characters that we've all worked with in our careers, but it's an amazing read, and I wish you the best in your future book writing ventures. Thank you for your time, sir.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.